They call ADX Florence escape-proof, a place where time itself can't move without permission. But what if I told you that even in America's most secure supermax, a few inmates managed to bend the system from the inside? From coded letters that crossed federal lines, to forbidden art escaping solitary walls, these men proved that control has cracks, and survival has its own genius. Stick around till the end, and if you love real-life prison stories that defy the impossible, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the channel for more true crime documentaries. ADX Florence, known officially as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, stands in the dry plains of Fremont County, Colorado. From the outside, it looks more like a military compound than a prison, surrounded by razor wire, motion sensors, sniper towers, and sand-colored walls that vanish into the desert heat. But to those who know it from the inside, ADX isn't just a place. It's a psychological experiment, a design to break the human will without laying a hand on it. Every cell is a tomb of concrete, 7 by 12 feet with a steel door, a narrow window facing the sky, and a shower controlled by guards outside. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in total isolation, speaking only through metal slots or not at all. Even when allowed recreation, it's alone, in a cage no larger than a parking space. Meals come through a slot. Conversations echo through ventilation grates. For most, years pass without touching another human being. Among those walls live names America never forgets. The Unabomber Theodore Kaczynski, Ramzi Yousef, the man who plotted the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, Richard Reid the shoe bomber, and dozens of other high-security terrorists and gang leaders. To the Bureau of Prisons, this was the answer to chaos, a place where violence ends and control reigns supreme. But as history would show, ADX Florence had one fatal weakness. It underestimated the power of the human mind. Even in near-total silence, intelligence, obsession, and patience can become weapons. And for a few inmates, outsmarting the system wasn't about escape. It was about proving that even the world's tightest cage couldn't contain the will to connect, to create, or to resist. One of the first to expose these cracks was Mark Jordan, a man whose crime seemed almost poetic in its defiance. Jordan wasn't a gang leader nor a terrorist. He was a federal inmate serving time for armed robbery and murder. But within the walls of ADX Florence, he found something the guards didn't expect: creativity. In his cell, under 24-hour surveillance, Jordan began creating art. Detailed sketches. Painted portraits. Miniature worlds made from scraps of paper and ink scavenged from the smallest corners of his confinement. According to Bureau of Prisons policy, inmates could create artwork for personal use, but they were forbidden to sell or mail it for profit. Every outgoing letter, every envelope, every piece of paper, scanned, read, logged. Or so they thought. Yet somehow between 2010 and 2015 Jordan's art began surfacing in the outside world. In online auctions, mailed to contacts, even sold to collectors who had no idea where it truly came from. No official visitor ever carried them out. No guard was ever bribed. The art simply appeared, crossing one of the most impenetrable prison barriers in modern history. When investigators finally traced the trail, they were stunned. Jordan had exploited one of the few privileges left untouched by censorship: legal mail. Letters sent to attorneys could not be opened or read by staff, only inspected for contraband. By labeling certain correspondences as legal, Jordan slipped his artwork out through the one channel the system dared not violate: the sanctity of attorney-client communication. By the time prison officials caught on, dozens of pieces had already reached the outside world. Some sold for thousands. The act wasn't about money, it was about presence. Jordan had proven that even inside ADX he could leave a mark. He could make the outside see him. The scandal forced the Bureau of Prisons to re-evaluate how much freedom could exist inside the most restrictive place in America. But Jordan's defiance wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that exposed a deeper truth. Even in cages built for silence, voices find their way through cracks. While Jordan painted his way into forbidden communication, other inmates used intellect and secrecy to push the boundaries of control. Men like Kaczynski, Yousef, and Reid didn't just live in ADX. They studied it. Through coded messages, mathematical patterns, and carefully worded letters disguised as legal notes, these men built a hidden network, not of violence but of intellect. They communicated through the same legal loophole Jordan had used, turning the Bureau's own rules against it. The system was supposed to isolate them. Instead, it taught them how to manipulate isolation itself. By 2013, internal memos from the Bureau of Prisons revealed a disturbing reality. Despite near-total lockdown, high-profile inmates were still managing to exchange thoughts, ideas, and philosophies, bypassing filters that had been considered airtight. Some used subtle letter ciphers, others used shared legal documents or paralegal intermediaries to send thoughts that shouldn't have crossed any wall. In the most extreme cases, inmates in different wings were communicating through outside law firms and advocacy groups without ever physically writing to each other, exploiting every bureaucratic layer the system relied upon. It wasn't escape in the traditional sense, no tunnels, no hacksaws. But it was something far more terrifying to the government: intellectual rebellion. ADX Florence had promised control. These men proved that true control is an illusion. As the scandal spread, prison administrators began tightening mail rules, restricting attorney communications, and limiting what could be exchanged even under confidential legal conditions. But every change came too late. The system had already been outsmarted, not by brute force but by human ingenuity. Inside the walls of Florence, survival wasn't about strength. It was about patience, intelligence, and the ability to think 10 moves ahead of those who watched you every second of every day. And that's where the real story begins. The story of how a fortress built to contain the worst men alive became a classroom in psychological warfare, creativity, and resistance. When Theodore Kaczynski arrived at ADX Florence in 1998, the staff thought they had finally silenced one of the most intelligent domestic terrorists in American history. The man who waged a 17-year mail bombing campaign against scientists and universities was now confined to a single concrete cell, with only a narrow slit of sky for company. But Kaczynski had spent a lifetime mastering one thing: communication without detection. And in the bowels of ADX Florence, he would find a way to keep doing exactly that. For years, the Unabomber's letters were studied as much as they were feared. Each word, each phrase was deliberate, a code wrapped in philosophy. He used mathematics, linguistics, and subtle patterns to hide meaning. Inside ADX, this obsession didn't die. It evolved. Prison regulations stated that every inmate's correspondence was read and approved, except legal mail. Any letter addressed to attorneys or courts could not be opened without the inmate present. That rule, designed to protect constitutional rights, became the very loophole Kaczynski exploited. Between 2001 and 2006, a strange pattern began to emerge. Federal mail inspectors and FBI analysts noticed recurring themes in Kaczynski's letters: cryptic sentences about systems, resistance, and shared thought experiments. What made it alarming wasn't the content itself, but who else was writing similar letters. Ramzi Yousef and Richard Reid, two convicted terrorists housed in different sections of ADX. Yousef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, was a man obsessed with detail. He had studied electrical engineering and chemistry, and he spent his isolation reconstructing in his mind every formula and circuit he'd ever built. His letters, sent under the guise of legal complaints, contained complex numerical patterns, primes, Fibonacci sequences, and modular calculations, harmless on the surface but strange in repetition. Meanwhile, Richard Reid, the shoe bomber, who attempted to blow up an American Airlines flight in 2001, was writing letters that echoed phrases found in both Kaczynski's and Yousef's. Words like framework, order, and balance appeared across all three months apart, in communications cleared through different legal teams. To the Bureau of Prisons it seemed impossible. These men were not only isolated, they were forbidden from contacting each other directly. Yet somehow their words resonated as if part of a larger dialogue, a shared manifesto forming piece by piece through the mail system itself. Federal investigators grew suspicious. Was it coincidence? Or had the most secure prison in America become host to an invisible conversation among the world's most dangerous minds? It wasn't until 2011 that the truth began to surface. An internal security audit revealed that several advocacy groups, journalists, and paralegals who corresponded with Kaczynski were also in contact with Yousef and Reid, often unknowingly serving as relay points for their thoughts. The inmates weren't sending letters to each other directly. Instead, they were embedding coded messages into public or legal correspondence that these outside contacts would later publish, quote, or forward, effectively turning the media itself into a communication channel. In one instance, a paralegal working with a human rights organization received a letter from Kaczynski about the mathematical nature of social systems. 2 weeks later, she received a letter from Yousef commenting on structural designs of authority. Both seemed academic, until analysts compared them line by line and found mirrored sentence structures that, when combined, spelled out a new sequence of numbers: 11-9-17-4. A cipher later interpreted as a reference to a shared essay draft date. These exchanges were not about plotting violence, at least not anymore. They were about connection. Each man, trapped in his own concrete box, was reaching for validation, for acknowledgement that his mind still mattered beyond those walls. And in doing so they proved something haunting, that isolation may silence the body but never the intellect. When the Bureau of Prisons finally realized the depth of the problem, it triggered one of the largest overhauls in inmate communication policy in modern history. New mail screening units were built. Legal mail was now photocopied before being handed to inmates. External groups that had once served as bridges between prisoners and the public were cut off or placed under heavy surveillance. Even then, Kaczynski continued writing. His later letters revealed a tone of cold resignation, as if he knew the system had caught up, but he had already won a different kind of battle. He had proven that ADX Florence, the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies, could not fully control the flow of thought. That even under total lockdown, ideas could slip through the cracks, morph and multiply. To this day, the Bureau of Prisons keeps special monitoring units for correspondence linked to ADX inmates. Yet despite every measure, new stories emerge, of letters, essays, or coded poetry finding their way to public archives, often traced back to cells that were supposed to be silent. The Unabomber would later describe his experience in a letter to a journalist. "They built walls around my body, not my mind. The system fears those who think even when they have nowhere left to go." It was more than a confession, it was a statement of principle. And for many inside ADX, that sentence became a philosophy of survival. In the chapters to come, the focus would shift from codes and letters to another kind of defiance, inmates who learned to manipulate the surveillance system itself. Because if words could slip past guards, what about the very eyes that watched them? Every second inside ADX Florence is watched. Or at least that's what the system wants inmates and the public to believe. From the control room, guards can toggle between hundreds of live feeds. Corridors, rec cages, showers, even food slots. Every movement, every breath, every blink of a camera light reinforces the illusion of absolute surveillance. But for those who live in isolation year after year, studying these machines becomes second nature. And eventually, some discover that even the all-seeing eye can blink. The pattern of shadows. In 2012, an internal security memo leaked to the Denver Post revealed something stunning. Several inmates in the control unit had managed to coordinate simultaneous signal events during count times, using reflections and timing patterns invisible to most guards. It started with light. Each ADX cell has a narrow slit window, only 4 inches wide, facing the sky. During certain hours, when the sun hit the Rockies at just the right angle, a glint of light could travel down the cell block. Some inmates learned to use that reflection, tiny pieces of polished metal from broken pens, razor fragments, even toothpaste-covered foil, to send short bursts of light across the corridor. It wasn't Morse code exactly. It was simpler, a pulse for yes, 2 for no, 3 for attention. Enough to trade warnings, updates, or signals before counts or searches. The discovery sent shockwaves through the administration. The system that prided itself on total separation had just been beaten by geometry and sunlight. After an investigation, staff removed any reflective items and began staggering count times to break the rhythm. But it didn't end there. The more they tightened control, the more creative the inmates became. The case of the moving camera. ADX cameras are designed with precision. No blind spots, no delay. Yet, between 2014 and 2016, maintenance logs showed repeated issues in one specific range, Unit Tier 2. The same camera would occasionally tilt or freeze for 6 to 8 seconds at a time, always during early morning hours. For months, technicians blamed voltage drops or interference. But when one guard finally reviewed archived footage frame by frame, the truth emerged. The camera wasn't malfunctioning, it was being tricked. An inmate named Luis Spider Rosado, a former electronics thief from Miami, had discovered the camera's weakness. Using a small piece of graphite smuggled from a pencil and mixed with toothpaste, he created a reflective paste that dulled the lens just enough to distort the motion sensor. During the shift's low-light hours, the system mistook subtle light changes for static error, automatically freezing the feed until recalibration. That gave Rosado roughly 8 seconds. 8 seconds of invisibility inside the most secure prison in America. He never tried to escape. Instead, he used those seconds to retrieve or pass hidden notes through ventilation grates to another cell 2 doors down. Investigators later found the scraps, microfolded paper pieces containing numbers, not words. Codes. Possibly for commissary exchanges or warning signals about searches. When confronted, Rosado smiled and said something the warden never forgot. "You build machines. We build patience." His words became a symbol of everything the Bureau feared about human adaptability inside Florence. Machines could be programmed, but men could wait. And in isolation, patience turns into power. Beating the sensors. As technology advanced, ADX began using motion and sound sensors inside certain cells to detect tampering or self-harm. The system recorded every vibration, a safety measure and surveillance tool combined. But even that wasn't foolproof. In 2018, a behavioral specialist noticed something strange. One inmate's logs showed perfect, uninterrupted calm for weeks. Zero noise, zero vibration, zero irregularity. That was impossible. Even sleeping inmates shifted, breathed, or shuffled. When guards entered to inspect, they found the cause. The inmate, a former engineer named Thomas Greer, had figured out the frequency range of the sensors by observing the blinking rhythm of their diagnostic light. He then lined his concrete walls with wetted toilet paper layers to absorb microvibrations. The sound sensors recorded silence, not because he was inactive, but because the walls themselves had become soundproofed. When questioned, Greer claimed it was just an experiment in acoustics. But the truth was deeper. He wanted privacy, something no one inside Florence was meant to have. For a few months he had achieved it. The discovery forced administrators to recalibrate sensor frequencies across the entire facility, costing tens of thousands of dollars in new equipment. And once again, Florence learned that intelligence thrives in captivity. The system strikes back. By 2019, ADX Florence had become a digital fortress. New AI-based monitoring tools analyzed movement patterns, facial expressions, and even light shifts. But the lesson from those years still haunted the staff. There would always be someone inside, waiting, watching, learning the next weak point. The Bureau officially labeled these cases non-violent manipulation attempts, but internally they were called ghost ops, moments when the system lost control for just long enough to remember that it was watching human beings, not machines. Warden William Davis once summarized it best during a training session. "Every time we think we've closed every door, someone finds a crack in the wall." Florence isn't just a prison, it's a chess game that never ends. And that chess game would only get more complex in the years ahead. Because while some inmates learned to beat the eyes of the system, others found ways to manipulate the minds that ran it. Through psychology. Through fear. Through carefully crafted illusions. In the next chapter we'll uncover the most chilling stories yet, when inmates didn't just survive ADX Florence, they made the guards their pawns. ADX Florence was engineered to eliminate human influence. Every wall, routine, and rule was designed to keep emotions out and control in. But no system, no matter how mechanical, can fully erase the human factor. And that's where the smartest inmates struck hardest. When the walls became too thick to break physically, they began to work on something softer, yet far more powerful: the human mind. The manipulator's playground. Every day at ADX runs like a machine. Doors open and close at precise times, meals slide through slots like clockwork, and officers rotate duties on fixed schedules. But for inmates with sharp observation and sharper patience, predictability is opportunity. In 2010, internal reports documented a case involving Michael Rudman, a former white-collar criminal with a background in behavioral psychology. He wasn't violent. He wasn't loud. But he studied people, especially the guards. Within weeks, Rudman could tell who was on duty by the sound of their footsteps echoing down the tier. Officer Harlan's left boot squeaked. Lieutenant Pierce hummed as he walked. Rudman began greeting them by name, without ever seeing them. "Morning, Harlan. Hope the coffee's not as bitter as last time. Pierce, you missed roll call yesterday. Everything all right at home?" It was harmless at first, almost polite. But in a place built on power imbalance, familiarity is poison. Guards began second-guessing themselves. Some responded, some didn't. A few even laughed. That's all Rudman needed. He kept notes, meticulous ones, on behavior, tone, and weaknesses. Over months, he crafted conversations designed to elicit sympathy. He asked about their kids, about their lives, about anything human. And slowly walls began to crack. By the time supervisors noticed, Rudman had convinced 2 officers to smuggle him extra paper and pencils. Nothing dangerous, just small comforts. But that breach was psychological gold. It proved something chilling. ADX Florence could control movement but not manipulation. Rudman once told a psychiatrist during evaluation, "I don't need to escape the prison. I just need to live in your head rent-free." The empathy trap. Another story came from 2014, this one more subtle, more dangerous. An inmate named Derek Lowry, serving life for multiple murders, was known for his silence. He never caused trouble, never cursed, never shouted. But when a new guard named Officer Caldwell was assigned to his block, Lowry began what psychologists later called the empathy trap. It started with simple gestures. Thank you for a meal tray. Appreciate it when given mail. Small courtesies that stood out in a world of hostility. Caldwell, young and idealistic, began to view Lowry as a changed man. Over time he extended brief kindnesses, extra napkins, longer conversation, even a few minutes delay before lockdown. Lowry began sharing fragments of his past. A troubled childhood. Regret over his crimes. A desire to write poetry. Caldwell believed he was helping a man rediscover his humanity. Then one day during a shakedown, officers found a carefully folded piece of paper in Lowry's cell, a poem addressed to the only decent man left in Florence. Every line mirrored Caldwell's own words from casual conversations. His language, his phrases, his optimism, fed back to him through the inmate's hand. The effect was devastating. Caldwell broke down during debriefing, realizing he had been studied, mimicked, and psychologically manipulated for months. Lowry never raised his voice, never threatened him. But he controlled him completely. A fellow officer summarized the aftermath. He made the guard feel like the prisoner. And that's a kind of power we can't train against. The phantom complaint. Perhaps the most infamous example came in 2017, involving a group of inmates led by a man known only as Doc Martinez, a former paralegal convicted of fraud. Martinez understood bureaucracy, the veins through which the Bureau of Prisons operated. He used it as his weapon. ADX inmates are allowed to file grievances through official channels. Every complaint must be reviewed, documented, and responded to by staff. Martinez began drafting letters not about his own mistreatment, but about other inmates. Letters designed to pit officers against each other. He would file reports alleging one guard verbally abused another inmate, then send follow-up letters pretending to defend that same officer. Within weeks, multiple supervisors were fielding contradictory reports from the same source, each implying the others were under investigation. When the chaos peaked, a warden ordered an audit of all inmate correspondence. What they found was surreal. Dozens of neatly typed forms, consistent in structure, but written under different names. Some belonging to inmates who had no idea complaints had been filed in their names. Martinez had manipulated the administrative process to manufacture distrust inside the chain of command. The result? 2 officers were temporarily suspended pending false investigations, 3 supervisors were reassigned, and Martinez gained a new nickname among inmates, the warden's warden. He never raised a weapon, never left his cell, yet disrupted an entire hierarchy built on control. Breaking the system's mind. What these incidents proved was terrifying to those who designed ADX Florence. The prison's strength, the rigidity of its rules, was also its vulnerability. Because anything predictable can be studied. Anything studied can be exploited. In a place where movement is stripped away, thought becomes the ultimate tool of rebellion. Guards are trained to be machines, but they're human first. They grow tired, angry, lonely. They make mistakes. And in ADX, mistakes are currency. By 2020, after multiple psychological manipulation incidents, the Bureau introduced rotation policies, moving officers between units every few weeks to reduce familiarity. Mental health professionals were also brought in to train guards in counter-manipulation awareness, teaching them how to recognize charm, guilt traps, and mirroring behavior. But even with all that, the truth remained. Florence had become not just a battle of physical control, but of mental endurance. It was no longer about who held the keys. It was about who held composure longer. One retired warden once said in an interview, "ADX isn't a prison of walls, it's a war of wills. And the scariest part? The inmates have more time to fight it than we do." The mind games didn't end there. Because once some inmates learned to break the guards, others began to turn their attention to the system itself, the very bureaucracy that fed the prison machine. In the next chapter we'll expose the untold story of paper rebellion, how prisoners inside ADX Florence manipulated policies, lawsuits, and federal loopholes to rewrite their own rules from the inside out. When fists, words, and even light failed to break the system, a new battlefield emerged: paperwork. Inside ADX Florence, some of the most dangerous inmates in America discovered the one weapon that guards couldn't confiscate: the law itself. It began with grievances, hundreds of them. Forms filed in tight, slanted handwriting citing violations of rights, procedural errors, and mental health neglect. To the Bureau they were nuisances. To the inmates, they were siege tactics. By 2013, ADX officials were receiving more legal filings per inmate than any other federal prison in the country. One of the leaders of this silent rebellion was Thomas Silverstein, a legendary figure who had already spent decades in isolation for killing a correctional officer in 1983. From his cell, Silverstein wrote thousands of pages challenging his conditions, eventually leading to Silverstein v. Federal Bureau of Prisons, 2007, a landmark case arguing that decades of solitary confinement violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. He didn't win his freedom, but he did something even more remarkable. He forced the court to acknowledge his existence. After 23 years of silence, the system had to speak his name. Soon after, other inmates followed his lead. They studied legal guides, learned terminology, and began filing suits en masse, targeting everything from mail restrictions to temperature control. One inmate, Jack Powers, even sued over the psychological impact of long-term sensory deprivation. His claim led to an unprecedented internal review by the Bureau of Prisons and new policies for mental health monitoring inside ADX. It was called Paper Rebellion by Staff, a war fought not with violence but with signatures and statutes. And though most cases were dismissed, they succeeded in the one goal that mattered most, proving that even under the weight of total control, a voice written on paper could still shake the strongest walls in America. ADX Florence was built to be the end of resistance. No riots. No escapes. No uprisings. But what no one anticipated was that control breeds ingenuity, and silence breeds strategy. From smuggled art to coded letters, from flickering light signals to legal wars on paper, the inmates of ADX Florence redefined what it means to outsmart the system. They showed that even in a world where movement stops, the mind still runs free. So the next time you hear that ADX is escape-proof, remember this: the walls held every body that entered them, but they never truly captured every mind. Because in the heart of Colorado's desert, behind reinforced steel and concrete silence, the human will is still undefeated. If you found this story as haunting and fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps us tell more true stories that the world was never meant to hear. This is Behind Bars TV, where the walls talk and we listen.